The table was set with care, silver polished, candles steady, wine poured at exactly the right moment. On the surface, it was meant to be a simple family supper. But the man seated across from her hadn't come to eat. He had come to negotiate. He spoke easily, confidently, as though every word he said had already been agreed upon somewhere beyond this room. He discussed timing, arrangements, expectations, all the practical details of a future that, apparently, no longer belonged to her. Heads nodded. Polite murmurs followed. No one interrupted him. Not once did anyone ask what she wanted. She sat there listening, feeling the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest. Every instinct told her to remain composed, to be gracious, to accept what was being offered as if it were a privilege rather than a transaction. This was how things were done. Quietly. Respectably. Without resistance. The man paused, finally turning his attention to her, his gaze sharp and assessing. He smiled, not warmly, but confidently, the smile of someone accustomed to compliance. "So," he said, as if concluding a business discussion, "I trust this arrangement is agreeable." The room fell silent. She understood then what was being asked of her. Not consent, compliance. Not choice, obedience. They were waiting for her to confirm what had already been decided. For a moment, she almost did. Almost nodded. Almost accepted the future they had negotiated on her behalf. Then something inside her shifted. She set down her fork. Slowly. Deliberately. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, steady enough to carry across the table, sharp enough to cut through the certainty in his expression. What she said next would shatter the evening. Because in that moment, in front of everyone who expected her silence, she chose herself. And nothing at that table would ever be the same again. She was told it would be a quiet evening. Just family. Nothing formal. Her father had mentioned it that morning over breakfast, his tone dismissive, as though the matter barely warranted attention. "We'll dine together tonight. Your mother is looking forward to it." That was all. No guest list. No warning. No reason to prepare for anything more than an ordinary Thursday supper in late September, when the London season had ended and most titled families had already retreated to their country estates. She dressed simply. A day gown in soft grey silk, modest at the collar, no jewels except the small gold locket her grandmother had left her. She wore her hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, practical, understated, appropriate for a meal with no one to impress. When she descended the stairs just before 7 o'clock, she expected to find the small dining room set for 3, perhaps 4 if her younger sister had returned from visiting the Caldwells. What she found instead made her stop on the landing. The large dining room had been opened. The one reserved for guests. 4 people of rank. The table gleamed under candlelight. Every piece of silver had been polished until it shone. The good china, the set with the hand-painted ivy along the rim, used only for dinners with members of Parliament or visiting earls, had been laid out with military precision. Her mother's emerald necklace caught the light as she turned toward the doorway. She wore it only for formal occasions. Only when someone important was coming. Her father stood near the hearth, glass of port already in hand, his posture unusually stiff. He smiled when he saw her, too quickly, too brightly, and gestured for her to come down. "Ah, there you are, darling. Punctual as always." Something in his voice didn't match his expression. She descended slowly, her eyes moving across the room. 4 place settings. The 3rd was clearly for her mother. The 4th. The sound of boots on marble made her turn toward the front hall. A man entered. Older. Perhaps 40, though he carried himself with the kind of self-assurance that made age irrelevant. His coat was exquisitely tailored, charcoal wool with a subtle sheen that only the finest fabric possessed. His cravat was tied with perfect symmetry. Everything about him suggested wealth, position, and a man accustomed to being obeyed. Lord Pembroke. She knew the name, though she'd never met him directly. A viscount. Landowner. Widowed 2 years prior under circumstances no one discussed openly, though the whispers at garden party suggested his late wife had been unhappy. He stopped when he saw her, his gaze sharp and assessing, moving from her face to her figure with the casual entitlement of a man evaluating livestock at market. Then he smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. Confidently. "Miss Ashford," he said, bowing with textbook correctness. "What a pleasure to finally meet you properly." Finally. Her father stepped forward, voice over loud in the quiet room. "Lord Pembroke was gracious enough to accept our invitation. I thought it would be beneficial for you both to become acquainted." She looked at her father. Then at her mother, whose hands were clasped too tightly in front of her, knuckles pale. Then at Lord Pembroke, who watched her with the patience of a man who had already won something. "I wasn't aware we were expecting a guest," she said carefully. Her father's smile flickered. "It was a last-minute arrangement. I didn't want to trouble you with the details. Didn't want to trouble her. Or didn't want to give her time to refuse." Lord Pembroke gestured toward the table with easy authority, as though he were the host rather than the guest. "Shall we?" Her mother moved first, taking her seat with the mechanical grace of a woman who had been told exactly what to do. Her father followed, settling into his usual place at the head of the table. That left 2 seats. One beside her mother. One directly across from Lord Pembroke. She understood the geometry of it immediately. She would sit across from him. He would have an unobstructed view of her throughout the meal. Every word, every glance, every reaction, all of it visible, observable, catalogued. This wasn't a casual supper. This was a presentation. She took her seat slowly, feeling the weight of his attention like hands on her shoulders. The servants moved through the room in careful silence, pouring wine, setting the first course, a delicate consommé that steamed faintly in the candlelight, then retreating to the walls like witnesses at a trial. The first few minutes passed in the polite neutrality expected of strangers sharing a table. The weather. The unusually warm autumn. The state of the roads from Lord Pembroke's estate in Derbyshire. Her father spoke with the forced ease of a man trying too hard to appear relaxed. Her mother contributed small, precise comments about the gardens, the servants, the quality of this year's harvest. Safe topics. Harmless topics. Topics that had nothing to do with why Lord Pembroke was actually there. Then, as the soup bowls were cleared and the second course arrived, the conversation shifted. Lord Pembroke set down his wine glass and turned his attention to her father, his posture relaxed, his tone casual, but his words anything but. "I've been giving considerable thought to our earlier discussion," he said. "The more I consider it, the more I believe the arrangement would be mutually advantageous." Her father's face brightened immediately. "I'm pleased to hear it. I confess, I'd hoped you'd see the merit in it." Arrangement. Merit. She set down her fork carefully, her eyes moving between the 2 men. "The compatibility of the estates alone is worth noting," Lord Pembroke continued, speaking as though she weren't sitting 3 feet away. "Your lands border mine to the south. Consolidation would eliminate several disputes over water rights and grazing access that have persisted for decades." Her father nodded eagerly. "Precisely my thought. And with the railway expansion planned for next spring, the combined properties would have considerable leverage in negotiating terms." Quite. They were talking about land. About railways. About water rights. Not about her. Except they were. Lord Pembroke leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting toward her for just a moment before returning to her father. "And her education? You mentioned she reads?" "Extensively," her father said, a note of pride creeping into his voice. "French, some Italian. She plays pianoforte. Watercolors, needlework, all the appropriate accomplishments. Good breeding. Impeccable. Her mother's family is connected to the Ashtons of Kent. Minor title, but respected lineage." Lord Pembroke nodded thoughtfully, as though tallying figures in a ledger. "And her temperament? I find that matters more than most men appreciate." Her mother spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice soft, almost apologetic. She's been raised to understand duty. She's sensible. Obedient. Obedient. The word landed like a stone in her chest. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression neutral. But beneath the surface, something cold and sharp began to unfurl. They were discussing her. Listing her qualities. Her education. Her temperament. As though she were a horse being considered for purchase. And not once, had either of them looked at her while speaking. The dowry, of course, is modest, her father continued, and there was an edge of apology in his voice now. Given our circumstances, I'm afraid I cannot offer what a man of your standing might typically expect. But I believe the other advantages more than compensate. Lord Pembroke waved a hand dismissively. I'm not concerned with dowry. I have no need of additional funds. What I require is stability. A suitable match. A woman who understands what is expected of her and will not make difficulties. Will not make difficulties. Her father exhaled, visibly relieved. Then I believe we are in agreement on all essential points. It would seem so. They spoke as though the matter were settled. As though terms had been finalized. As though her presence at the table was purely ceremonial, a formality required by tradition but ultimately unnecessary. She had not said a word. She had not been asked a single question. And yet, somehow, between the consommé and the roasted pheasant, her future had been negotiated, appraised, and agreed upon. Her mother reached for her wine glass, hand trembling just enough to make the liquid shiver. Her father smiled. And Lord Pembroke turned his gaze toward her for the first time since the conversation began, his expression calm, assured, expectant. As though waiting for her to thank him. The silence stretched. She didn't thank him. She didn't smile. She simply looked at Lord Pembroke, her expression unreadable, and said nothing. Her father cleared his throat. I believe what we've discussed will provide you with every security, darling. Lord Pembroke has been extraordinarily generous. Generous, she repeated quietly. Indeed. Her father's smile was too broad, too insistent. The settlement he's proposed is more than fair. You'll want for nothing. Settlement. The word hung in the air like smoke. What settlement? She asked, her voice calm, measured. Her father blinked. The marriage settlement, of course. Lord Pembroke and I have been corresponding for the past month, working through the details. A month. Yes. We wanted to ensure everything was in order before telling me. The table went still. Her mother's hand froze halfway to her glass. Her father's smile faltered. Lord Pembroke simply watched her, his expression unchanged, as though her question were a mildly curious interruption rather than an accusation. Darling, her father said carefully, these matters take time. Negotiations of this nature require discretion. We didn't want to trouble you with the particulars until we were certain the arrangement would proceed. And now you're certain. Yes. Because you've already agreed to it. Her father hesitated. Just for a moment. But it was enough. We've reached an understanding, he said finally. One that I believe serves everyone's interests. Lord Pembroke leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table, his tone measured and reasonable. Miss Ashford, I understand this may feel sudden. But I assure you, your father has been meticulous in considering your welfare. The terms we've agreed upon are designed to provide you with comfort, security, and a position befitting your station. What terms? She asked. He blinked. I beg your pardon. You've mentioned terms. A settlement. Arrangements. What, specifically, have you agreed to? Her father shifted in his seat. That's not something you need to concern yourself with. If it concerns my future, I believe I have every right to concern myself with it. Lord Pembroke's jaw tightened slightly, though his voice remained smooth. Very well. If you require specifics, upon our marriage, you will take up residence at Harrogate Hall, my estate in Derbyshire. You'll have a household allowance of £200 per annum for personal expenses. The estate staff will remain under my direction, though you'll oversee the household management as is customary. Any children born of the union will, naturally, be raised at Harrogate. He spoke as though reciting contract terms. Which, she realized with dawning horror, was exactly what he was doing. And when, she said slowly, is this marriage to take place? Her father answered before Lord Pembroke could. We've settled on October the 23rd, specifically. It allows sufficient time for the banns to be read and for your mother to make the necessary preparations. October 23rd. Yes. 3 weeks from now. Just over, yes. She looked at her father. Then at her mother, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Then at Lord Pembroke, who watched her with the calm patience of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. They had decided the date. The terms. The location. Her entire future. And they had done it without her. I see, she said quietly. Her father exhaled, relief flooding his features. I knew you'd understand once it was explained properly. You've always been a sensible girl. Sensible, she echoed. Yes. And I have no doubt you'll come to see this as the extraordinary opportunity it is. Lord Pembroke raised his glass. To a mutually beneficial arrangement. Her father raised his immediately. Her mother followed, though her hands shook. And she sat there, surrounded by people who claimed to care for her, and understood the truth. She had never been part of the negotiation. She had been the contract. She'd been sold. Not in whispers or shadows, but here, at her own dinner table, over roasted pheasant and wine her father couldn't afford. And if you're feeling the weight of that betrayal in your chest right now, then you need to stay. Because what she does next will change everything. Subscribe, because she's about to show them exactly what happens when you treat a woman like property. She needs you watching when she takes back what's hers. The plates were cleared. The third course arrived, lamb, perfectly prepared, garnished with sprigs of rosemary that filled the room with their sharp, earthy scent. Under different circumstances, it might have been pleasant. But she could barely taste anything. The conversation continued around her, lighter now that the difficult part had been handled. Her father spoke of the upcoming hunting season. Lord Pembroke discussed improvements he was making to the east wing of Harrogate Hall. Her mother mentioned the weather again, as though the temperature had any bearing on what was happening at this table. Small talk. Safe talk. The kind of conversation that happened after business had been concluded. She cut her lamb into precise pieces, chewed mechanically, and said nothing. Every few minutes, she felt Lord Pembroke's gaze drift toward her, assessing, measuring. Waiting for something. Her father kept glancing at her too, his expression hovering somewhere between expectation and unease, as though he couldn't quite decide whether her silence was agreement or resistance. Only her mother seemed unwilling to look at her at all. Finally, as the dessert course was brought out, a delicate pear tart with cream, her father set down his fork and turned to her directly. You've been very quiet, darling. She looked up. Have I? I'd hoped you might have, thoughts. On what we've discussed. Thoughts. As though this were a matter of preference. As though she'd been invited to express an opinion on wallpaper or the arrangement of flowers. I have many thoughts, she said evenly. Her father smiled, clearly taking this as encouragement. Then please, share them. We're all eager to hear. She glanced at Lord Pembroke, who leaned back in his chair, wine glass balanced elegantly in one hand, waiting with the calm assurance of a man who had never once considered the possibility that she might object. I was wondering, she said slowly, why I was not informed of these discussions earlier. Her father's smile tightened. As I explained, we wanted to finalize the details before. You wanted to finalize them without me. The correction landed quietly, but it landed. Her mother's spoon clinked against her bowl. Lord Pembroke's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, interest, perhaps. Or irritation. We wanted to spare you the tedium of negotiations, her father said, his tone deliberately patient, as though explaining something to a child. These matters are complex. Legal. Your involvement wasn't necessary until the terms were settled. My involvement, she repeated. In a matter concerning my own life. Concerning your future security, her father corrected, a note of firmness entering his voice now. Which I, as your father, am responsible for ensuring. By deciding it for me. By providing for you. He set down his glass with more force than necessary. Do you have any idea how fortunate you are? Lord Pembroke is a man of considerable standing. He could have his choice of women half your age with twice your dowry. And yet he has chosen you. The least you could do is show some gratitude. The word struck like a slap. Half your age. Twice your dowry. The message was clear, she was not a prize. She was a burden being unloaded. And she should be grateful that anyone was willing to take her. Lord Pembroke, to his credit, had the decency to look mildly uncomfortable. He raised a hand in a gesture of conciliation. Perhaps we should allow Miss Ashford time to adjust to the news, he said smoothly. It's a great deal to absorb in one evening. Of course, her father said quickly, eager to smooth over the tension. Of course. I don't mean to pressure you, darling. I only want you to understand what an extraordinary opportunity this is. He looked at her expectantly. Her mother looked at her plate. And Lord Pembroke looked at her with that same calm, assessing gaze, as though he were watching a horse being gentled, waiting to see if she would accept the bridle or require further persuasion. They were waiting. All of them. Waiting for her to smile. To nod. To accept what had been decided for her and thank them for their generosity. Waiting for her to perform. The silence stretched. She could feel the weight of their expectation pressing down on her like a physical thing. Her father's anxious hopefulness. Her mother's quiet dread. Lord Pembroke's patient certainty. They wanted her compliance. No, they expected it. Expected her to lower her eyes, soften her voice, and say the words that would make this easier for everyone. Thank you, my lord. You honor me. I am grateful. The proper response. The expected response. The response every woman in her position had given for centuries. She felt the words forming in her throat, years of training rising to the surface like instinct. This was what daughters did. What they were supposed to do. Accept what their fathers arranged. Trust that the men in their lives knew better. Submit gracefully to decisions made on their behalf. Her lips parted. And then she thought about October 23rd. 3 weeks away. A date chosen without her. A future decided without her. A life negotiated, finalized, and packaged like goods at market while she sat in this very house, unaware that her autonomy was being signed away in her father's study. The words died in her throat. When, she said quietly, was this decided? Her father blinked. I'm sorry. When was it decided that I would marry Lord Pembroke? The question hung in the air, simple and sharp. Her father shifted in his seat. Darling, as I've explained, we've been in correspondence for a month, she finished. Yes, you said. So for the past month, while I believed my future was still my own, you were negotiating it away. I was securing it, her father corrected, his voice taking on an edge now. There is a difference. Is there? Yes. He set his napkin down with deliberate care. You may not appreciate this now, but when you're older. When I'm older, I'll be married to a man I didn't choose, living in a house I've never seen, bound by terms I was never consulted on. Her voice remained calm, but each word landed with precision. Forgive me if I fail to see how that constitutes security. Her mother's breath caught. Lord Pembroke's expression hardened, just slightly, the first crack in his careful composure. Her father's face flushed. You're being unreasonable. Am I? She turned to him fully now, her hands folded neatly in her lap, every inch the proper lady even as she dismantled the evening around her. Then explain to me what would have been reasonable. Should I have been grateful to discover this arrangement over supper? Should I have been pleased to learn my wedding date before learning there was to be a wedding at all? You're twisting this. I'm clarifying it. She glanced at Lord Pembroke, who watched her now with an expression she couldn't quite read. You came here tonight expecting my agreement. Not requesting it. Expecting it. Because you'd already secured it from my father. Lord Pembroke set down his wine glass slowly. Miss Ashford, I understand you're surprised. But surely you must see. What I see, she interrupted, her voice quiet but unflinching, is that no one in this room intended to ask me anything. You came to inform me. To present me with terms already finalized. To collect a signature on a contract I never agreed to negotiate. The room went utterly still. Her father's hands gripped the edge of the table. Her mother had gone pale. And Lord Pembroke. Lord Pembroke's mask of pleasant civility was beginning to slip, revealing something colder beneath. You're upset, her father said tightly. I understand that. But you will not speak to a guest in this house with such honesty. She met his gaze steadily. Or with such inconvenience. Enough. The word cracked through the room like a whip. Her father stood, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. You will retire to your room. We will discuss this tomorrow when you've had time to compose yourself. But she didn't move. She simply looked at him, and said the words that would shatter whatever remained of the evening's civility. No. The word hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. No. Her father stared at her, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally anger. I beg your pardon. I said no. She remained seated, her posture perfect, her voice steady. I will not retire. I will not compose myself. And I will not pretend this conversation can be postponed until tomorrow as though it were a matter of my nerves rather than my future. You forget yourself. On the contrary. I believe I'm remembering myself for the first time this evening. Her father's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, he seemed unable to form words. Lord Pembroke stood slowly, his movement deliberate, controlled. When he spoke, his voice was calm, maddeningly, condescendingly calm. Miss Ashford. He said her name the way one might address a child refusing to go to bed. I can see this has been overwhelming for you. That's understandable. Women of sensitive temperament often require time to adjust to significant changes. Women of sensitive temperament. The phrase dripped with patronization. I assure you, she said quietly, my temperament is not the issue. Isn't it? He tilted his head slightly, studying her with the detached interest of a man observing a curious specimen. You're reacting emotionally to what is, at its core, a practical arrangement. That suggests a certain fragility of understanding. Fragility of understanding. She felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. What I understand, she said, her voice dropping lower, more controlled, is that you've mistaken silence for agreement. And you've mistaken compliance for consent. Lord Pembroke's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. My dear, I think you misunderstand how these matters work. Then enlighten me. Very well. He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting the posture of a lecturer addressing a slow student. Marriage, particularly among families of our station, is not a romantic endeavor. It is a strategic alliance. A merging of interests, properties, bloodlines. Your father, as the head of your family, is responsible for ensuring your future security. He has determined that this arrangement serves that purpose. And what of my determination? Your determination. He actually chuckled, a soft, indulgent sound that made her skin crawl. You have been raised in comfort, sheltered from the realities of the world. You have no estates to manage, no debts to settle, no understanding of the financial pressures your father faces. What, precisely, qualifies you to make such determinations? The mask had slipped completely now. This was who he truly was. Not the polished gentleman who'd entered her home with practiced courtesy. This was a man who believed women were decorative, obedient, and fundamentally incapable of reason. "I see," she said softly. "I'm glad." He smiled again, clearly believing he'd won. "In time, you'll come to appreciate the wisdom of those who know better. Wives often do, once they've settled into their proper role." Wives. He'd said it again. As though she'd already accepted. As though her objections were merely a performance, a brief flutter of resistance before inevitable surrender. Her mother made a small sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. Her father stepped forward, his voice tight with desperation now. "Lord Pembroke is offering you security. Position. A life free from the uncertainties that plague women without proper protection." "Protection," she repeated. "Is that what you call it? What would you call it?" She looked at her father. Then at Lord Pembroke, who stood watching her with that infuriating patience, that absolute certainty that she would eventually see reason. And she understood, with perfect clarity, that they genuinely believed they were acting in her best interest. That made it worse, somehow. If they'd been cruel, calculating, openly malicious, that would have been easier to fight. But they believed they were saving her. Protecting her. Doing what was right. And that belief made them dangerous in a way simple villainy never could. Lord Pembroke spread his hands in a gesture of magnanimous patience. "So. Do you accept?" She looked at Lord Pembroke. Then at her father, whose face had gone tight with anxiety and barely suppressed anger. Then at her mother, who sat frozen, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. They were all waiting. Expecting her to fold. To accept. To perform the gratitude they believed she owed for being rescued from spinsterhood and financial uncertainty. She felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. Every woman who'd sat at a table like this one, surrounded by men who'd decided her future without her consent. Every daughter who'd swallowed her objections and accepted what was offered because refusal meant ruin. The proper thing would be to yield. The safe thing would be to submit. The expected thing would be to say yes. She set down her fork. The soft clink of silver against porcelain seemed impossibly loud in the silence. Then she stood. Her father jerked forward. "Sit down." She ignored him. She straightened her spine, smoothed her hands over her skirt, and looked directly at Lord Pembroke. When she spoke, her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was calm. Clear. Absolutely certain. "No." Lord Pembroke blinked. "I beg your pardon." "No," she repeated. "I do not accept your proposal. I do not accept the terms you and my father negotiated. I do not accept the settlement, the timeline, or the presumption that my agreement was unnecessary." The room went deathly still. Her father found his voice first. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." She turned to him, and there was no anger in her expression. Only clarity. "You asked if this arrangement was agreeable. It is not. You assumed my compliance. You were mistaken. This is absurd." "What is absurd," she continued, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade through silk, "is that you believed you could negotiate my life without my presence and expect me to be grateful for it." She turned back to Lord Pembroke, who was staring at her with an expression somewhere between shock and outrage. "You came here expecting a signature on a contract I never saw. You discussed my education, my temperament, my bloodline as though I were livestock at auction. You spoke of me in the third person while I sat at this table. You did not ask what I wanted. You did not consider that my consent might be required rather than assumed. Your father has every right." "My father," she said quietly, "does not have the right to sell me." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of shock through the room. Lord Pembroke's face darkened. "I will not be spoken to in this manner." "Then leave." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. "I will not marry you," she said, each word precise and deliberate. Not in October. Not in spring. Not ever. I will not take up residence at Harrogate Hall. I will not manage your household. I will not bear your children. I will not become your wife. She paused, letting each statement settle into the space between them. You came here tonight believing my future belonged to you because you'd purchased it from my father. You were wrong. My future is not for sale. And it is not yours to take. Lord Pembroke's hands had curled into fists at his sides. His careful composure had cracked completely, revealing fury beneath. Do you have any idea what you're refusing? The security? The position? Yes, she said simply. And I'm refusing it anyway. You're a fool. Perhaps. She met his gaze without flinching. But I'm a fool who belongs to herself. Her father made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan. Her mother had begun to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. And Lord Pembroke stood there, a man who had never in his life been denied, who had come to this house expecting obedience and was instead facing public humiliation. She had just shattered the evening. Shattered the arrangement. Shattered every expectation placed upon her. And she had done it in front of everyone. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was so complete she could hear the candles guttering in their holders, the faint creak of the house settling, the shallow breathing of her mother across the table. Then Lord Pembroke laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound, stripped of all pretense of civility. You foolish girl. He shook his head slowly, as though witnessing something both tragic and absurd. You have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done. Do you? He took a step toward her, and for the first time that evening, there was real menace in his posture. You think this is courage. You think you've won something. But all you've done is sign your family's death warrant. Her father went rigid. Pembroke, surely we can. Can what? Lord Pembroke turned on him, all traces of the polished gentleman evaporated. Negotiate? After your daughter has insulted me in my face? After she's treated a proposal that could have saved you like refuse to be discarded? Saved us? She felt ice spreading through her veins. What does he mean? Her father wouldn't look at her. His face had gone ashen, his hands trembling as they gripped the back of his chair. Tell her, Lord Pembroke said, his voice sharp as broken glass. Tell her what you owe. Tell her why you were so eager to see this arrangement concluded. Father? Silence. £18,000, Lord Pembroke said flatly. That's what your father owes. To creditors, to the bank, to me. Due in full by the end of November. The number struck her like a physical blow. £18,000. A sum so vast she could barely comprehend it. More than her father could earn in a decade. More than the estate could produce in 5 years. The marriage settlement, Lord Pembroke continued, his tone clinical now, detached, included my agreement to assume those debts. To settle them quietly, discreetly, without the scandal of bankruptcy or seizure. Your father would have kept this house, his reputation, his place in society. He paused, letting the words sink in. And all it required was you. She turned slowly to her father. Is this true? He wouldn't meet her eyes. I was trying to protect this family. By selling me to pay your debts. By securing your future. His voice cracked. What did you think would happen? Did you think you'd marry for love? Find some young man of good family who'd overlook your lack of dowry, your father's financial disgrace? You're 23. You've had 3 seasons with no proposals. No prospects. No value, she finished quietly. That's what you mean, isn't it? I have no value except as a bargaining chip to save you from ruin. Her mother sobbed openly now, her face buried in her hands. Lord Pembroke straightened his cuffs with deliberate care. Since we're speaking plainly now, let me be perfectly clear about what happens next. He looked at her father, not at her. The debts I agreed to settle, They remain due in 6 weeks. Without my intervention, the creditors will come. They will take this house, your furnishings, your horses, everything of value. Your name will be destroyed. Your family will be cast out of society. Your wife and daughters will have nothing. He turned to her then, and his smile was cruel. So yes, Miss Ashford. You have reclaimed your future. I hope it provides adequate shelter when you're living in rented rooms in a boarding house, surviving on what meager income your needlework might provide. The words landed like blows, each one precise, devastating. You cannot do this, her father whispered. Pembroke, please, if we could discuss. There is nothing to discuss. Lord Pembroke moved toward the door, his movements sharp with barely contained fury. You offered me an arrangement. I accepted. Your daughter has rejected it publicly, humiliated me in front of servants who will have this story spread across London by morning. He paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. I came here in good faith. I offered respectability to a family drowning in debt, security to a woman with no other prospects. And this is how you repay me. He looked directly at her, and there was something vindictive in his expression now, something that made her blood run cold. I hope your pride sustains you, Miss Ashford. Because it's all you'll have left. Then he was gone, the front door slamming with enough force to rattle the windows. The silence that followed was worse than anything that had come before. Her father sank into his chair, his face in his hands. Her mother wept. And she stood there, understanding for the first time the true cost of what she'd just done. She hadn't just refused a marriage. She'd refused her family's salvation. The house they'd lived in for 3 generations would be seized. Her mother's jewelry, sold. Her sister's prospects, destroyed by association with bankruptcy and scandal. Everything, gone. Because she'd said no. Her father looked up at her finally, and the expression on his face was one she'd never seen before. Not anger. Not disappointment. Defeat. I hope you're satisfied, he said hoarsely. You've gotten your freedom. And it's cost us everything. He stood slowly, moving like a man decades older than he was. 6 weeks. That's all we have. 6 weeks before they come for the house. He walked past her without another word, leaving her standing in the wreckage of the evening. Her mother rose as well, still crying, and followed him without looking back. And she was left alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remains of an uneaten supper, the candles burning low, understanding for the first time that freedom carried a price. She just hadn't known it would be paid by everyone she loved. She didn't sleep. How could she, knowing that in the room down the hall, her father sat in the dark calculating ruin? That her mother cried silently into her pillow? That her younger sister, blissfully unaware at the Caldwells, would return tomorrow to find her future shattered? Dawn came gray and cold through her window. She rose, dressed herself, her maid had not come, whether from shame or instruction she didn't know, and descended to a house that felt like a tomb. Her father's study door was closed. The breakfast room was empty. The servants moved through their duties with averted eyes, and she understood, they knew. Of course they knew. By now, half of London probably knew that she'd refused Lord Pembroke, that the family was ruined, that they had 6 weeks before the creditors came. She stood in the hallway, surrounded by furniture that would soon belong to someone else, portraits of ancestors who would witness the family's disgrace, and felt the crushing weight of consequence. She'd won. And she'd lost everything. The knock at the front door came just before 9. She heard Wilson, their butler, answer it. Heard the low murmur of conversation. Then his footsteps approaching. Miss Ashford. His voice was carefully neutral. You have a visitor. I'm not receiving. He insisted I deliver this first. He handed her a letter. Heavy paper. Sealed with a ducal crest she didn't immediately recognize. She broke the seal with trembling fingers. Miss Ashford. I hope you will forgive the presumption of this correspondence. We were introduced briefly at Lady Thornbury's garden party last May, though I doubt you recall the meeting. I do. I also recall, with perfect clarity, a conversation I overheard 3 months ago at the Reform Club. Lord Pembroke, in his cups, spoke extensively about his late wife. How she'd been difficult. How she'd required management. How she died conveniently before becoming more trouble than she was worth. The men listening laughed. I did not. I have since made quiet inquiries into Lord Pembroke's character. What I discovered convinced me that any woman who refused him demonstrated not foolishness, but wisdom. I understand your father faces significant financial pressure. I also understand that you have just declined the apparent solution to that pressure at great personal cost. I am writing to offer an alternative. She stopped, her heart hammering. The letter continued in a neat, precise hand. My late mother managed extensive charitable works before her passing. Her foundation requires management, someone educated, principled, and capable of resisting pressure from those who would misuse the funds. The position comes with a salary of £300 per annum, housing in the foundation's London offices, and complete autonomy of operation. It is not a rescue. It is employment. And it is yours if you want it. Additionally, I am prepared to purchase your father's debts from his creditors, not as a gift, but as a loan to be repaid over 15 years at minimal interest. This will allow your family to retain their home while managing the obligation responsibly. I ask nothing in return except your skill in managing my mother's legacy. If this arrangement interests you, I will call at 11 o'clock today. If it does not, burn this letter and know that I wish you well regardless. The Duke of Ashford. She read it twice. Then a third time. This wasn't charity. It wasn't rescue. It was choice. Real choice. The choice to work, to earn, to build something of her own. The choice to save her family without selling herself. The choice to prove that a woman's value wasn't measured in her marriageability but in her capability. The clock struck 11. Wilson appeared in the doorway. Miss Ashford. The Duke of Ashford has arrived. Her father emerged from his study, confusion and desperate hope warring on his face. The Duke? Why would? She looked at him. Then at the letter in her hands. Because I said no, she said quietly. And he respects that. She walked to the drawing room, where a man she barely remembered stood waiting. He was younger than Pembroke, perhaps 30. His eyes were kind but assessing, and when he bowed, it was with respect, not possession. Miss Ashford. Your Grace. I trust you received my letter. I did. And? She took a breath. Behind her, she could feel her father's anxiety, her mother's fear, the weight of her family's future pressing against her shoulders. But for the first time in her life, the decision was hers. I accept, she said. The position. The loan. All of it. On your terms. On our terms, she corrected. As equals. He smiled then, genuine, warm. Then we have an agreement. He extended his hand. Not for her to kiss. Not for her to accept passively. For her to shake. As equals. She took it. She'd been sold at a dinner table. Told her value was measured in debt relief and bloodlines. Treated like property to be transferred. And she'd said no, even when it cost her everything. Even when it meant her family's ruin. Even when every person at that table expected her silence. If you watched her fight for herself, if you felt that moment when she stood and chose freedom over safety, then you owe her this. Subscribe. Because there are thousands of women being silenced at tables just like that one. Being told their voices don't matter. Being negotiated around, spoken over, decided for. And when they see her story, when they see that someone fought back and survived, it might give them the courage to say no too. Don't just watch her win. Help her story reach the women who need it most. Subscribe. Share. Be a witness to the moment she reclaimed herself. She deserves that much.